So what you guys are watching right now is a drag show for kids. Drag the kids to what exactly was the event called again? This happened in Dallas, Texas. By the way, welcome to this episode of WjLive. Michael Austin, Abby Liebing. We're reporters here at the Western Journal, and today we're talking about exactly that. This drag show that happened this weekend in Dallas, Texas, at a gay bar called Mr. Mister.
Yeah, Mr. Mister.
Mr. Mister. And
kind of a clever name, actually.
Caused a lot of controversy because there were children, as you could see in that video, there were children in attendance. You know, there's a little girl in a pink dress with a little boy towards the front. You know, there were kids at this drag show.
There were babies.
As this man kind of danced up and down the aisle, they were handing, the kids were handing him cash. It was basically, it was as close to a strip show as you can get. This really scantily clad transvestite. The guy's name is actually, let me see. So he's Albert Xavier Estrada. He's a transgender performer that is known for selling sexual content on his OnlyFans account.
Yeah, that's what
going under the pseudonym Ariel Diamond. And so, this is where we are right now. We have kids being dragged into drag shows.
Dragged into drag. Welcome to Pride Month.
Welcome to Pride Month, where children are slipping dollar bills into the scantily clad, clothes of transgender men. And so, this whole event, it caused just outrage this weekend.
Naturally.
Twitter going crazy at the actual event. So just to give you a few more details on it, it was called Drag the Kids to Pride, this event in Dallas, Texas, in Mr. Mister, the gay bar. And so you had kind of all these drag performers going up and down the aisle, dancing. You had kids joining in on kind of doing these kind of drag, these sexualized dances. And then there's a sign behind it all, and we actually have a picture of that sign to show you guys that said, "It's not gonna lick itself."
Because that's what you want your kids to hear and see.
So clearly you have a lot of kind of sexual content, sexual stuff going on in this whole situation. And we have, a few other pictures. Yeah, Drag the Kids to Pride. That's the name of the event. And then we have another picture actually of one of the children that attended. It was actually an infant. Yeah, look at this.
Yeah,
so,
an actual baby there.
So that happened. And then in addition to that, you had all these protesters outside the event. A few sort of more conservative, kids attending drag show people. We used to call those people normal, the kind of normies out there.
Now they're protesters, alt-righters.
And it just so happens, and we have a video for you we're going to show you in just a second here. It just so happens that the man, one of the men that was protesting this event, happened to be black, and he was assaulted and accosted by a group of white masked liberals. Here it is for you. So
they would not let him alone.
I mean, you can peacefully protest as long as you're protesting for the right things, apparently. As long as you're protesting for kids being exposed to sexual content, as long as that's what you're protesting for, you're okay to protest.
That is fine.
If you're opposed to it, no thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, from all the videos, that guy was just, he kept telling, the two police officers showed up later in the video, and he was like, I'm trying to walk, he was trying to walk away at that point. He didn't want to be involved anymore, and he's like, I'm just trying to walk down the street, and they kept heckling him. Yeah. Because he's morally wrong because he didn't hold their opinions.
Exactly.
Naturally.
And the situation continued to escalate until eventually the Dallas Police Department was called, and they had to intervene. And you had lots of headlines claiming, lots of reports that were claiming that police came in and actually took all the kids out. That's not necessarily what happened. According to the police, they went in there and they just kind of separated the crowds and made sure all the conflict was resolved.
Yeah, so that there wasn't anything violent going on. And from my understanding, I think there's still details kind of coming out, but after that, things kind of started to die down. It was kind of a brunch hour drag show anyways, so it was things were going to wrap up. There was an ending on it, and so
Yeah, I believe the local ABC, I might be wrong, it might be like CBS or something like that, but the local coverage of the event called it a family-friendly drag show.
yeah,
No
so,
quotes included, so they were making that claim.
Yeah,
But yeah.
so the organization itself, they had in their advertising and things, they were very clearly, this is, because of Pride Month, we want to have this open for children. And they were very explicit because they were like, normally, as a drag bar, this is for people over 21 because we serve alcohol and it's a drag show.
Right.
But they're like,
Yeah.
they're explicit. They're like, we want this to be a family friendly
Yes.
event. And to raise money for LGBTQ youth, like specific youth organizations to support young transgender, gay, bisexual kids, which there's just so much, so many connotations behind all of that. And it's like they were trying to, put a really good face on it. Like, we're doing this for a fundraiser and to, inclusivity and kindness so that the children understand. And you're like, understand what?
Yeah, understand that a dude dressed as a woman with half of his butt hanging out can just shake it in front of them, and then they need to give him dollar bills when he does that. That's what the kids need to understand to help them with their...
Yeah, exactly. And well, here's the thing, a drag show of all things. It's one thing to, expose let's say, I'm a liberal mom who has kids and wants to expose them to the gay agenda. It's one thing to be like, you know what, I'm going to explain it to them. I'm going to have them meet some gay people. I'm going to take them to a gay pride parade.
Right.
But a drag show? You're kind of like, that's a bit extreme. That's why go to that degree?
Well, and, we start to get into the category of, how harmful is this for children? We know for sure that sexually explicit content of any nature, if a kid is exposed to that, there can be lifelong, trauma and consequences associated with that. To which degree of sexuality, would this cause trauma in a kid growing up? That's a little more iffy, but it's certainly not an appropriate environment to have children in. No. And that's where we kind of get to the debate that's happening on Twitter right now. You have all kinds of conservatives. I think Allie Beth Stuckey was one of the most prominent ones I saw, saying that Republicans need to respond to this by criminalizing child drag shows. One, because it's child sexual abuse, and two, because it will force Democrats to defend having children attend drag shows. Now, before we get into whether Republicans should try to forward some legislation that would criminalize drag shows, do you think this is a good sort of strategy for the Republic? I think it's a genius strategy. I think to
outlaw things like
this. Well, if you issue a law, like basically what Allie Beth Stuckey said, and what lots of other classical liberals and conservatives have been saying, is that if you ban it, that's Republicans taking the offensive. And then the only response that can happen on the left then is to defend, okay, here's why you need to have children at these drag shows.
Yeah.
So I think on that level, setting aside whether we, we'll get to where we land on the issue ourselves. But in terms of strategy, in terms of political strategy, I think that's a pretty smart move, especially if it's like, okay, now we're saying we should end them. Now, Democrats, please explain to us why kids need to be shoving dollar bills into this dude's leather suit.
I would say logically that should make sense, but I think per usual, there's a miscalculation and misunderstanding on the Republican right wing of things that they're like, ooh, we'll make the Democrats the bad guys because, what this will put them in a bad spotlight. And I think Democrats would be like, what's the problem? Of course kids should be at drag shows. If kids want to be at drag shows and parents want to take them there, that's fine. That's no problem. I don't think that this is going to villainize the Democrats in the way that Republicans envision it because, Democrats are just going to be like, yeah, that's what we think.
I don't know. I mean, I think, look, we're going to see some polling out soon, possibly from, because we are working closely with some people that are working closely with some pollsters. We might ask them to find out the answers to certain questions, but we're going to see polling soon on where American parents, Republicans and Democrats, stand on this specific issue. We're going to see how they feel about children attending drag shows like this, children, seeing strippers and different kind of sexualized dancers and people wearing scantily, people are very scantily clad, just dancing around and doing all this, sexually provocative stuff. And I have a feeling that a majority of Republicans and a majority of Democrats, over 50%, I would guess, if shown the images, if described exactly what's going on at these events, would probably not be in favor of it. So
yeah, but they're in favor of gender therapy and young children.
Not majorities.
And young children being able to
there are plenty, but
identify their sexual identity at a young age.
But even with the Florida Parental Rights and Education law, you saw a majority of Florida Democrats in support of that, which would ban kind of the gender ideology kind of training or classroom lessons from kids below a certain age.
That's Florida. Florida people are old, so that's a little
Florida Democrats.
Florida Democrats are kind of a class in and of themselves, I would say. And I agree that I think statistically it wouldn't necessarily be a majority of Democrats that jump on this boat, but I think, as we have seen again and again and again with every extremely progressive agenda, it is a tyranny of the vocal minority. Democrats and far, far left progressives have found out they don't have to have this. They don't have to have the numbers. They don't have to have the majority of a political party backing a certain law or stance. They just have to have a loud enough minority that makes it a human rights issue. And bam, there it is.
And, they've been doing that with LGBT, with transgender issues for a while now.
For decades.
And especially, the L and the G and kind of the B. They those guys have been getting their due for quite some time now. But since Democrats started really aggressively pushing this T stuff, which is transgender rights and issues like that, there's definitely not been as universal an agreement behind it as we saw with kind of the gay rights movement.
I don't know. If you go back to the beginning of the gay rights movement, it wasn't very universal agreement. It was pretty divided in the 80s and 90s, which is when the rubber really hit the road.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think kind of then? Where do you think this heads to next? Where do you think the end game is for this? Do you think
I think it's going to
continue to head in this direction?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue along the projection that lesbian and gay. We'll specifically keep it lesbian and gay. Yeah. Because those are pretty widely accepted at this point. It was kind of a long campaign, but here we are. We're living in a society.
You see lots of Republicans.
Yeah, we're living in a society with a pretty bipartisan support behind that.
Yeah.
It did take decades though, and I think, sadly, I wish it wouldn't, but I do think realistically that's where the transgender movement's headed.
I think the place we could be headed, and you can always count on Republicans to fail to do their part. So this could all be enshrined in federal law. But what I see happening with a lot of this is, it does keep going in this direction, specifically in the bluest of states.
Oh yeah.
And you start to see that kind of red-blue country divide, which will never lead to a civil war, of course, because instead of the North and the South, it's going to be sprinkled throughout. You got your red states mixed up with your blue states, but you're going to see two different countries. You're going to go to California, and you're going to see all kinds of places, all kinds of gay bars where there's kids attending drag shows, and I did look up. There are some images of actually a woman, a burlesque stripper, where she went to kind of a brunch situation, and there was a little girl there, and she's putting like money in her bra as well.
Oh, gosh.
So all this sexualization, it's going to continue in those places. But I do think red states are going to start heading in the opposite direction.
Oh, I agree.
From this quite a bit.
And I think so much of it will come down to the state level. I've been predicting for a long time that, like you said, there's not going to be a civil war. People aren't going to take this out in the battlefield, but it will just be the increasing polarization of society, of just, your red states, your Republican conservatives start settling in places. We're already seeing this with Texas. Right. If you disagree with the state's laws, you move to Texas.
Yeah.
and vice versa. If you're in Texas and you want a more liberal law, you move to California or Oregon. And I think that that's just going to continue along that trajectory of just, things are going to get more and more polarized. People will live in their communities that are more isolated. If I'm living somewhere conservative, I'm not really going to be that interested in vacation in Los Angeles anymore.
Right.
And there you go. I think
There
that's
you go.
just going to. I think
You
that's
got
going to be
two
the
different
MO for a really long time.
That's really interesting. I think that's generally where we're headed to. Now, here's the this is the fun question. We've been waiting to get to this because this is going to be fun.
It's fiery questions.
When it comes to banning drag shows for children, there are plenty, so all these calls that I was talking about on social media, on Twitter, from Allie Beth Stuckey, James Lindsay, who's a little more of a classical liberal, but, people, all kinds of people of that nature are saying, ban drag shows for kids. It's wrong. It should be banned. The federal government should make it illegal. State government should make it illegal, whatever. Just make sure it's illegal. Not all of us.
Not
on the
all
right
of
side
us.
of the aisle.
I'm feeling rather pointed at.
Yeah, so I'm definitely more on that side. I think that these events should be illegal. But yeah, some people have a little more libertarian approach. So why don't you explain where you stand on this issue? We can kind of have a little bit of a debate.
Yes, I have a more libertarian approach to this, mainly because I am very hesitant about governments ever imposing laws.
Not a bad tack to take.
That is the political philosophy
Yeah.
that I come from. Anytime a government wants to impose a law on anything, it's like, double check that.
Okay.
So I would say, do not ban drag shows for children.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that straight up. I would be in support of, there are ways to restrict it. You can, just like with alcohol,
Yeah.
you can have age limits. With advertising, there are strict Federal Trade Commission and regulations for advertising sexuality. There are regulations that you can pursue without just banning it. And I think if you just ban it and go down that road of outlawing something like this, you get into pretty slippery, moralistic lawmaking.
Now, if we had an age limit for this, I mean, that's the ban that I'm talking about. I don't know. Like, I'm not saying ban all drag shows for all people. I'm saying no children are allowed to ever attend a drag show.
Oh, okay, sorry. I should clarify the age limit.
Yes.
I wouldn't say there should be a federal or a state age limit.
So who creates that regulation?
I would leave it up to private businesses.
Leave it up to private businesses. Well, so
that is the hardcore libertarian stance.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of libertarian stances of my own, but I think where a lot of libertarians where I tend to part with them is with externalities and with the consequences of certain behaviors.
Understandably.
Obviously, we don't let any person do anything they ever want. We don't have 100%, 1,000% freedom, because then you'd have the freedom to kill people and to steal things.
Well, that'd be anarchy. Yeah.
So we have some laws, and those laws tend to protect kind of people from being encroached upon by others. Now, when I look at, and my stance on this is very much the same. There's lots of Republicans that think that, the porn industry should be completely unregulated, should just be just everything's fine. It's up to the parents to take care of it. I am 100% against that as well. I mean, these things have all sorts, when a kid views sexual material like this, I think that there are serious negative consequences. And I think at that point, just like, the government needs to protect kids from physical violence, I think you need to protect them from, the types of emotional, psychological, and spiritual damage that you would get from being at an event like this. And look, that you can't have laws that protect kids from every single thing ever that would cause any sort of problem.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that, but I think you can have more regulations, more laws that would protect kids from more things like sexual content, sexual behaviors. They shouldn't. I don't think they should be allowed to be at events like that for that reason, because it's harmful to them.
I agree, it's harmful to them. I'm not debating that issue at all. It's a horrible thing.
Yeah.
But where I come down is that everyone wants to just say the law applies to the child, which in an ideal world, yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is you have this thing called parents.
Yes.
And my biggest problem is when you try to start going down the road of regulating parental decisions. Now, when it comes, you bring up porn before. I think porn is a completely different category because that is the internet, and everyone knows the internet is an animal in and of itself that parents and individuals cannot regulate. Even if your parent says, "Don't watch porn, kiddo," kids can still access porn. It's very difficult. But when it comes to an in-person event, a drag show, which is just different connotations, I wish that parents would have enough morality and sense to be like, no, I'm not going to take my kid to that show. But I also do firmly believe in parental choice, because if you take parents out of the equation with laws, then you have what our public schools are doing right now. And you have the breakdown of family. And I understand that, there are bad connotations to just, having the view of allow parents to parent their children, because guess what? We live in a fallen world, and some parents are going to be horrible parents. They're going to, there will be bad consequences to that. But, it's kind of the lesser of two evils argument. I think that it is a greater risk of breaking down the family unit to try to take parents out of the equation with laws like this.
I get that. I definitely get that. And whether the government is involved or not, you could be sure that everyone here agrees that children should not be going to
I want to make it clear,
or drag shows.
If you have kids, actually, if you're a normal person, don't go to a drag show. It's frightening.
Not good. Not good, especially for your kids. Well, guys, that's pretty much all we had for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of wjlive, powered by the Western Journal. If you want to help us out, please consider subscribing to the Western Journal at westernjournal.com/join. Essentially, that's our subscription platform that helps us circumvent, a lot of big tech censorship when you pay directly for the content that we produce. And hey, you don't need to do that, but by joining, by supporting us, you're helping the fight. You're helping us create conservative content. You're helping us dissect the news from a conservative perspective, because, all anyone's gotten for the last several years has been mostly mainstream content from a left-wing perspective. And so we're trying to balance that out. We're trying to help give you the other side of that. And, your support is sorely needed. Make sure to also follow us on YouTube at youtube.com/wjlive. And look, just support the Western Journal, read the Western Journal, watch our content whenever you can. It's always any little thing you could do is a great help. So, wrapping up here, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we'll see you again on Wednesday.